Right, we are going to talk about something that we have talked about before, but I think it is so important and it was so fundamental to my photography, we're going to talk about it again. It's Tutorial Tuesday. Welcome back to Tutorial Tuesday, where each and every Tuesday, we bring you a brand new fresh tutorial. I've messed up the words. Every Tuesday, we bring you a brand new, fresh photography tutorial. Now, this week, we are talking about the one thing that improved my photography just exponentially, just outrageously, and I think it is probably the most important thing in all of photography. That's a bold claim. So tell me if I'm wrong in the comments. Be nice, but tell me if I'm wrong in the comments. And that is this. This is the one tip I give to anyone who is struggling with their photography. Make sure that you are identifying what is the subject in your frame. Now, that sounds pretty obvious and pretty straightforward, but that's not always the case. When it comes to stuff like portraiture, of course you know who the subject is, right? It's your subject. That makes perfect sense. But when it comes to landscape photography, as an example, or food photography, or product photography, or street photography, lots of different types of photography, you might not always be able to immediately point to what is the subject of this photo? But that is probably the most important thing, because that is the anchor point around which everything else is built. Now, there's a lot of layers to this, so we're going to go through them one by one. The first part is that having an identified subject in your photo makes it much easier for your viewer to digest the whole photo, right? It gives them an anchor point for their eyes to rest on. And if there's no identified subject, if there's not an obvious subject to the scene, their eyes are going to kind of dart around looking for that anchor point, looking for that rest point. And it just feels a bit uncomfortable, it feels a bit unfinished. Now, this is especially true when you have a beautiful view, something which is very lovely, but you don't actually identify a subject within that scene. I've had this lots of times, to be honest, when I've been on holiday, when I'm in a city and I have a beautiful view, maybe over the city, and you kind of snap the photo, but when you come to edit it, it's just not really working, and that's because there's no obvious subject to the photo. It only needs to be something small. It only needs to be something that is the anchor point, right? So it could be a specific building. It could be a shaft of light hitting a certain part of the landscape. It could be a person in the landscape. When it comes to street photography, it could be, and I would imagine it would be, a person. Again, it could be light. It could be color. It really could be anything, but there needs to be that anchor point in the photo for the viewer's eye, but also because that's the point around which you're going to build your composition, right? How do you know where to place certain elements of the photo if you don't know what the subject is? So whether you're using rule of thirds, whether you're trying to get some symmetry going, whether you're trying to play with light and shadow, maybe go for some leading lines, if you don't know what the subject is, how are you going to lead your viewer's eye towards it? And that's a really important part of things. Now, the best way that I've found to do this is to slow down, right? Sometimes you don't need to do this. Sometimes you know what the subject is and it's actually time is of the essence. You need to capture the moment, right? Wildlife makes sense. Portraiture, like I said earlier, makes perfect sense. But if you don't have an obvious subject in the frame, slow yourself down. Think about what's going on and which part of this is the most visually interesting to you. That's how I always approach a new landscape that I want to photograph, is what part of this landscape is actually the most visually interesting to me? Why am I taking this photo? And maybe a little bit about what story you're trying to tell. Now, like I say, sometimes a landscape is more interesting than other times, right? It could be the time of day, it could be the light, it could be the drama going on around it. Identify what it is that's interesting and focus in on that. Build the composition around that and actually move yourself, right? So if you decide that the sky, some element of the sky is the most important part, you maybe want to move a little bit lower to make sure you're getting more of the sky. Maybe the actual horizon has the most important part. Maybe that's the subject. Well, maybe you do place it right in the middle and you get that lovely symmetry. Maybe there's a specific part of the landscape that you then can think about, okay, do I want to expose for that? Do I want to silhouette that? How am I going to play around with the settings here? Once you have identified that subject, that informs every other part of your photo and how you're going to put it all together, which ultimately informs your viewer on how to view it and the story and the vibe that you're giving off. It's a small tip in some ways because that's pretty much all there is to it, but it is huge in the way that you think about your photography and the way that it really changes what you do with your photography. And for me, this is something that took a little while, and I still have to remind myself about it when I go out and take photos, but it is probably the most fundamental and important lesson that I learned the whole time through my photographic journey. What do you think about that? How important has that been to your photography? And do you have anything additional to add that perhaps I've not touched on? You can check out a full list of all the kit we use for all these different photos, plus this video down in the description, so you can check that all out for yourself. Don't forget to like, subscribe as well, because there's new content all the time. I will see you in the next video. But until then, as always, thanks for watching.